The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Emma Mitchell adjusted her camera strap for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold autumn air, but from pure excitement. After saving for 2 years, she had finally made it to London for the changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. This was her first trip outside her small hometown in Ohio, and everything felt surreal. Emma had always been fascinated by British history and royal traditions. Her grandmother used to tell her stories about the Queen and the palace guards, and now at 23 she was actually here. She arrived at the palace gates 2 hours early to secure a good viewing spot, squeezing herself between tourists from around the world. The crowd was thick, with people holding phones and cameras high above their heads. She positioned herself near the front, her heart racing with anticipation. Emma had planned this moment down to the smallest detail. She knew exactly when the guards would march out, which angles would give her the best photographs, and even what time the light would be perfect. Her travel blog back home had a modest following of 200 readers, mostly friends and family, but she dreamed of this trip launching her into serious travel writing. As the crowd grew denser, Emma found herself pressed against the metal barriers. A family from Japan stood to her left, their young daughter bouncing with excitement. To her right, an elderly British couple chatted about how the ceremony had changed over the decades. Emma smiled, soaking in the atmosphere. This was exactly what she had imagined. The ceremony began promptly at 11. The guards marched out in their iconic red uniforms and tall bearskin hats, their movements precise and synchronized. Emma's camera clicked rapidly as she captured every moment. The music from the military band filled the air, and goosebumps rose on her arms. This was really happening. She leaned forward to get a better shot of the lead guard standing on her tiptoes. In her excitement, she pressed harder against the barrier. Then, without warning, the metal railing gave way. The section had been loose, weakened by years of tourists leaning against it, and Emma's weight was just enough to dislodge it completely. Time seemed to slow down. Emma stumbled forward, her camera flying from her hands. She crashed onto the ground just beyond the barrier, landing hard on the restricted area of the palace grounds. Her bag spilled open, scattering her belongings across the pristine walkway. A tube of lipstick rolled toward the marching guards. Her passport landed face up several feet away. Coins clinked and scattered in every direction. The crowd gasped collectively. The music faltered for just a moment. Emma lay there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Her knee throbbed where it had hit the stone. Her palms were scraped and stinging, but worse than the physical pain was the horrifying realization of where she was. She had fallen into the restricted zone. The area where tourists were absolutely forbidden, the place where royal protocol was sacred and security was paramount. Emma's face burned with humiliation as she looked up. Hundreds of eyes stared down at her. Phone cameras that had been recording the ceremony were now pointed at her. She could already imagine the video title spreading across social media. A security officer was already moving toward her, his expression stern. She tried to scramble to her feet, but her legs felt like jelly. Her hand slipped on the smooth stone as she attempted to gather her scattered belongings. The lipstick had rolled even further away, now sitting directly in the path of the marching guards. Her camera lay several feet away, its lens cap missing. The whispers from the crowd grew louder. Emma caught fragments of conversations. Someone laughed. Another person tutted disapprovingly. A child asked their parent what the lady had done wrong. Emma wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Her throat tightened as tears threatened to spill. This was supposed to be the highlight of her trip, the moment she had dreamed about for years. Instead, she was making a spectacle of herself in front of hundreds of strangers, and probably thousands more online. She could already hear her mother's worried voice when she called home to explain. The security officer was getting closer, speaking into his radio. Emma's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Would she be arrested? Fined? Banned from the UK? Her hands shook as she reached for her passport, trying to stuff her belongings back into her bag as quickly as possible. Just as she managed to get to her knees, still desperately trying to collect her things, something unexpected happened. The lead royal guard, who had been marching with military precision toward the palace entrance, suddenly stopped. His fellow guards continued their formation, but he broke away from the line. The crowd fell silent. This never happened. The guards were famous for never breaking protocol, for standing completely still even when tourists tried to make them laugh or react. They were trained to ignore distractions, to maintain their posts no matter what, yet here was one of them, stepping out of formation. Emma froze, still on her knees, her scattered belongings forgotten. The guard's tall bearskin hat cast a shadow over his face as he approached. His red uniform was immaculate, every button gleaming in the sunlight. His boots clicked against the stone with each measured step. She couldn't read his expression from this angle, couldn't tell if he was angry or simply following some protocol she didn't understand. Her heart hammered in her chest. The silence from the crowd was deafening. Even the military band had stopped playing. The guard stopped directly in front of her. Emma looked up at him, her face still burning with embarrassment, tears now freely rolling down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain that it was an accident, but no words came out. Then something remarkable happened, something that would change not just Emma's day, but her entire life. The guard did something that no one in the crowd, perhaps no one in the long history of the palace, had ever seen before. He extended his white-gloved hand toward her. Emma stared at the extended hand, hardly believing what she was seeing. The white glove seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. She blinked away tears, wondering if embarrassment had made her hallucinate. But no, the guard's hand remained there, steady and real, offered to help her up. With trembling fingers, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle as he pulled her to her feet in one smooth motion. Emma stumbled slightly, her injured knee protesting, and the guard steadied her with his other hand on her elbow. The touch was brief but kind. Once she was standing, he didn't immediately return to his post. Instead, he bent down and began collecting her scattered belongings. The crowd watched in absolute astonishment as this symbol of rigid military discipline picked up her lipstick, her coins, even her lens cap. He gathered each item carefully, as if they were precious artifacts rather than the mundane contents of a tourist's bag. Emma stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. The guard handed her items to her one by one, his movements deliberate and respectful. When he picked up her camera, he examined it briefly, checking for damage before placing it gently in her hands. His eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw something unexpected there. Not anger or annoyance, but understanding, perhaps even a hint of kindness. He collected her passport last, glancing at it before handing it over. Emma thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost as if he wanted to smile but couldn't due to protocol. She clutched her belongings to her chest, fresh tears streaming down her face. But these tears were different now, born not from humiliation but from overwhelming gratitude. The guard straightened to his full height and gestured toward the barrier where security personnel were already repairing the broken section. He indicated that she should return to the safe side. Emma nodded, unable to find words adequate to express her thanks. As she limped toward the barrier, favoring her injured knee, something else unexpected happened. The guard turned to the crowd and, in a clear, commanding voice that carried across the courtyard, spoke. The words were simple but powerful. He explained that the barrier had failed, that the young woman had not intentionally breached security, and that accidents happen to good people. His tone held authority but also compassion. A ripple went through the crowd. Faces that had been judgmental softened. The woman who had tutted earlier now looked ashamed. Several people actually applauded. The security officer, who had been approaching with a stern expression, visibly relaxed. He helped Emma back over the repaired barrier, asking if she needed medical attention for her knee. Emma shook her head, still too overwhelmed to speak properly. The security officer smiled at her, a real warm smile, and told her these things happen. He even helped her find a good spot in the crowd where she could sit down for a moment and collect herself. Someone handed her a bottle of water. The Japanese family beside her gave encouraging words in broken English. The ceremony continued, and the guard returned to his formation as if nothing unusual had occurred. But everything had changed. Emma watched through her camera lens as he marched with his unit, this time seeing not just a symbol or a tourist attraction, but a real person who had chosen kindness when he could have remained rigid and unfeeling. She took photos, but her heart wasn't fully in it anymore. Her mind kept replaying what had just happened. In her moment of deepest embarrassment, when she felt most alone and exposed, someone had broken protocol to show her compassion. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. That choice meant everything. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Emma remained seated, still processing. She checked her camera and was relieved to find it undamaged. Her knee had stopped throbbing, though a bruise was already forming. She would have a physical reminder of this day, but she knew the emotional memory would last far longer. Other tourists began approaching her. Some asked if she was okay. Others wanted to know what the guard had said to her. A few asked for her story, wanting to share it on their own social media. Emma answered politely but briefly. She wasn't ready to turn this intimate moment into content, not yet. One elderly British gentleman, the one who had been standing near her earlier with his wife, sat down beside her. He introduced himself as Robert, a retired military man himself. He told her that in his 40 years of watching the changing of the guard, he had never seen anything like what just occurred. The guards were trained to ignore all distractions to maintain absolute protocol. For one to break formation like that was extraordinary. Robert explained that the young guard's actions would likely be discussed by his superiors. There might be consequences for breaking protocol, even for a kind reason. But Robert also said that what the guard did was profoundly human, and that sometimes being human mattered more than following every rule to the letter. His words made Emma realize the guard might face trouble for helping her. The thought troubled her deeply. Someone had shown her kindness, possibly at personal cost. She asked Robert if there was any way she could help, any way to explain to the authorities that the guard had done nothing wrong and everything right. Robert patted her hand and said the truth had a way of coming out, especially with so many witnesses. Emma spent the rest of the afternoon exploring London, but her mind kept returning to the palace. She walked through Hyde Park, bought fish and chips from a street vendor, visited a bookshop in Covent Garden. Through it all, she replayed the morning's events. Her embarrassment had faded, replaced by a warm feeling of connection to a stranger who had chosen kindness. That evening, back at her small hotel room in Earl's Court, Emma finally checked her phone. It had been buzzing intermittently all day, but she had ignored it. Now she opened her social media apps and gasped. The morning's incident had indeed been captured on multiple phones and uploaded everywhere. But the story wasn't what she had feared. The videos and posts weren't mocking her. Instead, they celebrated the guard's compassion. Hashtags were trending. People were calling him a hero, praising his humanity, sharing the footage with captions about kindness and breaking rules for the right reasons. News outlets were picking up the story. Someone had even created a petition asking that the guard not face any punishment. Emma read through hundreds of comments. People from around the world were touched by what they had witnessed. Many shared their own stories of embarrassing moments and the strangers who had helped them. The story was resonating far beyond what she could have imagined, sparking conversations about compassion, protocol, and what really matters in life. She found her own travel blog had exploded with traffic. People had tracked her down through tags in other people's videos and were leaving messages of support. Her modest 200 followers had become 2,000 overnight. They wanted to hear her side of the story, to know how she felt, to understand what the guard had said to her. Emma sat on her narrow hotel bed, staring at her phone screen. She had come to London dreaming of launching her writing career, of creating content that would touch people. Now she had a story that was touching thousands, but it hadn't happened the way she planned. Life rarely did. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Emma Mitchell adjusted her camera strap for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold autumn air, but from pure excitement. After saving for 2 years, she had finally made it to London for the changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. This was her first trip outside her small hometown in Ohio, and everything felt surreal. Emma had always been fascinated by British history and royal traditions. Her grandmother used to tell her stories about the Queen and the palace guards, and now at 23 she was actually here. She arrived at the palace gates 2 hours early to secure a good viewing spot, squeezing herself between tourists from around the world. The crowd was thick, with people holding phones and cameras high above their heads. She positioned herself near the front, her heart racing with anticipation. Emma had planned this moment down to the smallest detail. She knew exactly when the guards would march out, which angles would give her the best photographs, and even what time the light would be perfect. Her travel blog back home had a modest following of 200 readers, mostly friends and family, But she dreamed of this trip launching her into serious travel writing. As the crowd grew denser, Emma found herself pressed against the metal barriers. A family from Japan stood to her left, their young daughter bouncing with excitement. To her right, an elderly British couple chatted about how the ceremony had changed over the decades. Emma smiled, soaking in the atmosphere. This was exactly what she had imagined. The ceremony began promptly at 11. The guards marched out in their iconic red uniforms and tall bearskin hats, their movements precise and synchronized. Emma's camera clicked rapidly as she captured every moment. The music from the military band filled the air, and goosebumps rose on her arms. This was really happening. She leaned forward to get a better shot of the lead guard standing on her tiptoes. In her excitement, she pressed harder against the barrier. Then, without warning, the metal railing gave way. The section had been loose, weakened by years of tourists leaning against it, and Emma's weight was just enough to dislodge it completely. Time seemed to slow down. Emma stumbled forward, her camera flying from her hands. She crashed onto the ground just beyond the barrier, landing hard on the restricted area of the palace grounds. Her bag spilled open, scattering her belongings across the pristine walkway. A tube of lipstick rolled toward the marching guards. Her passport landed face up several feet away. Coins clinked and scattered in every direction. The crowd gasped collectively. The music faltered for just a moment. Emma lay there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Her knee throbbed where it had hit the stone. Her palms were scraped and stinging, but worse than the physical pain was the horrifying realization of where she was. She had fallen into the restricted zone. The area where tourists were absolutely forbidden, the place where royal protocol was sacred and security was paramount. Emma's face burned with humiliation as she looked up. Hundreds of eyes stared down at her. Phone cameras that had been recording the ceremony were now pointed at her. She could already imagine the video title spreading across social media. A security officer was already moving toward her, his expression stern. She tried to scramble to her feet, but her legs felt like jelly. Her hand slipped on the smooth stone as she attempted to gather her scattered belongings. The lipstick had rolled even further away, now sitting directly in the path of the marching guards. Her camera lay several feet away, its lens cap missing. The whispers from the crowd grew louder. Emma caught fragments of conversations. Someone laughed. Another person tutted disapprovingly. A child asked their parent what the lady had done wrong. Emma wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Her throat tightened as tears threatened to spill. This was supposed to be the highlight of her trip, the moment she had dreamed about for years. Instead, she was making a spectacle of herself in front of hundreds of strangers, and probably thousands more online. She could already hear her mother's worried voice when she called home to explain. The security officer was getting closer, speaking into his radio. Emma's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Would she be arrested? Fined? Banned from the UK? Her hands shook as she reached for her passport, trying to stuff her belongings back into her bag as quickly as possible. Just as she managed to get to her knees, still desperately trying to collect her things, something unexpected happened. The lead royal guard, who had been marching with military precision toward the palace entrance, suddenly stopped. His fellow guards continued their formation, but he broke away from the line. The crowd fell silent. This never happened. The guards were famous for never breaking protocol, for standing completely still even when tourists tried to make them laugh or react. They were trained to ignore distractions, to maintain their posts no matter what. Yet here was one of them, stepping out of formation. Emma froze, still on her knees, her scattered belongings forgotten. The guard's tall bearskin hat cast a shadow over his face as he approached. His red uniform was immaculate, every button gleaming in the sunlight. His boots clicked against the stone with each measured step. She couldn't read his expression from this angle, couldn't tell if he was angry or simply following some protocol she didn't understand. Her heart hammered in her chest. The silence from the crowd was deafening. Even the military band had stopped playing. The guard stopped directly in front of her. Emma looked up at him, her face still burning with embarrassment, tears now freely rolling down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain that it was an accident, but no words came out. Then something remarkable happened, something that would change not just Emma's day, but her entire life. The guard did something that no one in the crowd, perhaps no one in the long history of the palace, had ever seen before. He extended his white-gloved hand toward her. The television studio was smaller than Emma had imagined. Behind the bright lights and cameras, it felt cramped and overly warm. A makeup artist dusted powder on her face while a producer briefed her on what to expect. Emma nodded along, but her mind was still processing her meeting with James. She had arrived expecting formality and distance, maybe even confrontation. Instead, she had found a genuine connection with someone who understood the weight of that moment at the palace. The interview host, Miranda Chen, was a warm woman in her 40s who immediately put Emma at ease. During the commercial break before Emma's segment, Miranda leaned over and whispered that her own daughter had shared the viral video, saying it restored her faith in people. That personal touch helped Emma relax. When the cameras rolled, Emma told her story simply and honestly. She described her excitement about the trip, the accident with the barrier, and her overwhelming embarrassment. When she spoke about James helping her, her voice caught slightly. Miranda asked what that moment had meant to her, and Emma answered from her heart. She said it reminded her that we all have moments of vulnerability, times when we stumble or fall, or make mistakes in front of others. The question was not whether those moments would happen, but how people around us would respond. James had chosen to respond with compassion rather than judgment, with help rather than mockery. That choice had changed her entire experience from traumatic to transformative. The interview aired that evening and was shared widely online. Comments poured in from viewers around the world. Many people shared their own stories of embarrassing public moments. Others talked about times when strangers had helped them or times they wished someone had. The conversation was shifting from just Emma's story to something bigger, something about how we treat each other in moments of weakness. Emma's remaining days in London took on a different character. Strangers recognized her on the street not with judgment but with kindness. A barista at a coffee shop refused to let her pay, saying her story had inspired his whole family. An elderly woman on the tube patted her hand and told her she had handled everything with grace. People wanted to tell her their own stories, to connect over shared human experiences. She visited the palace once more before leaving London, standing at a respectful distance to watch another changing of the guard ceremony. This time she didn't push to the front or strain for perfect photographs. She simply watched, appreciating the tradition and the human beings in those impressive uniforms. When the ceremony ended, she whispered a quiet thank you toward where James might be stationed and walked away. During her last evening in London, Emma met James again for dinner. He had a day off and suggested a small Indian restaurant in his neighborhood, far from the tourist areas. They talked for hours over curry and naan bread, conversation flowing easily between them. James was curious about Ohio, about Emma's life and family. She asked about his military service, his plans for the future. James confessed that the attention from the incident had been overwhelming for him too. Fellow soldiers teased him good-naturedly, calling him the People's Guard and the protocol breaker. His commanding officers had spoken to him seriously about maintaining standards while also acknowledging his good judgment. The military was traditional, but even they recognized that times were changing, that modern soldiers needed to balance discipline with humanity. Emma asked if he regretted helping her, given all the complications it had caused. James looked genuinely surprised by the question. He said no, absolutely not. If he saw the situation again, he would make the same choice. Some things were more important than protocol, and treating people with kindness was one of them. His answer made Emma smile, confirming what she had already come to believe about his character. As they parted that evening, standing outside a tube station under the glow of streetlights, there was an awkward moment where neither knew quite how to say goodbye. Emma wanted to hug him but worried it might be too forward. James seemed to have the same hesitation. Finally, Emma laughed and opened her arms, and James stepped into the embrace. It was brief but warm, the kind of hug between people who understood each other. Emma promised to visit London again. James promised to message her regularly. They both knew that long-distance friendships were difficult, that the intensity of their unusual meeting might fade with normal life's routines. But they also both wanted to try, to maintain this unexpected connection born from an embarrassing accident. Emma flew home to Ohio 2 days later, her suitcase full of souvenirs and her camera roll full of photos. But the most valuable things she brought back were invisible. She carried home a new perspective on kindness, vulnerability, and human connection. She carried home confidence that had been forged in embarrassment and reinforced by grace. She carried home the beginning of an unlikely friendship with someone thousands of miles away. Her family met her at the airport, eager to hear about her famous incident. Her mother had watched the television interview 5 times and cried each viewing. Her father, typically reserved with emotions, admitted he was proud of how she had handled everything. Her younger brother just wanted to know if the guard looked as cool in person as he did in videos. Back in her small Ohio town, Emma became a minor celebrity. The local newspaper wanted an interview. The high school where she had graduated 5 years earlier asked her to speak to students about her experience. Friends she hadn't talked to in years reached out, wanting to reconnect. Her travel blog was now approaching 50,000 followers, with people eagerly awaiting her next post. But Emma found herself reluctant to capitalize too heavily on the moment. Brands reached out offering sponsorship deals if she would promote their products alongside her story. A literary agent contacted her about writing a book. A motivational speaking company suggested she could make good money on the circuit telling her story to corporate audiences. She turned most offers down. The incident at the palace had taught her something important. The most meaningful moments in life often come unplanned, and they lose something when turned into products or performances. She wanted to honor what happened by staying true to herself, not by becoming a professional victim turned inspiration. Instead, she wrote thoughtfully on her blog about travel, vulnerability, and human connection. She shared other stories from her London trip, giving context to that one famous moment. She posted photos and reflections, building a body of work that was authentic rather than sensational. Her follower count grew steadily, attracted by her genuine voice rather than just one viral moment. 3 weeks after returning home, Emma received a package from England. Inside was a formal photograph of the Queen's Guard in full ceremonial uniform, signed by several of the guards, including James. With it was a handwritten note from James, describing a funny incident at the palace involving a tourist's runaway dog. He wrote like he talked, with warmth and humor, making Emma feel like she was right there with him. She pinned the photograph to her bedroom wall, a reminder of how one unexpected moment had changed her path. Emma had gone to London dreaming of becoming a travel writer. She had returned as exactly that, but not in the way she had imagined. She had learned that the best stories often came from imperfection, that vulnerability could be a strength, and that human kindness was worth more than any perfectly composed photograph. Months passed and life settled into a new rhythm for Emma. Her blog continued to grow, now with over 70,000 followers genuinely interested in her travel perspectives and personal reflections. She found freelance writing opportunities, contributing articles to travel magazines and websites. Nothing made her rich, but she was actually earning money doing what she loved. Her bedroom in her parents' house was gradually transforming into a makeshift office. Emma and James stayed in touch regularly. Their messages started formal but quickly became comfortable and familiar. He sent her pictures from his daily life, the London she hadn't seen as a tourist. She shared glimpses of small-town Ohio, a world completely foreign to him. They talked about everything from their favorite foods to their deepest fears, building a friendship across the distance. In March, James messaged with unexpected news. He was being given leave in May and had been thinking about traveling. Would Emma be interested in showing him around America? He had saved up some money and wanted to see the country beyond what appeared in movies. Emma's heart raced as she read the message. She immediately said yes, already planning an itinerary in her mind. Her parents were surprisingly supportive when she told them. Her mother, who had worried about Emma talking to strangers online, had watched enough interviews with James to feel comfortable with him. Her father, a veteran himself, respected James's military service. They offered to let James stay in their guest room, which Emma gratefully accepted. The weeks leading up to James's visit flew by in a flurry of planning. Emma cleaned her room obsessively, organized local attractions, and researched the best routes for day trips. She was nervous in a way she hadn't expected. Their friendship had grown through screens and written words. Would it translate to real life when they spent multiple days together? What if the easy conversation they had online felt awkward in person? James arrived on a warm May afternoon, exhausted from the long flight but smiling broadly. Emma met him at the airport, and her worries evaporated the moment they hugged hello. It felt natural, comfortable, like greeting an old friend rather than someone she had only met once before. The drive home was filled with easy conversation, James marveling at the wide open spaces so different from England's density. Her parents welcomed James warmly. Her mother had prepared a massive dinner, worried about him being hungry after traveling. Her father grilled him about military life, finding common ground in shared experiences despite serving different countries. Her brother peppered him with questions about the palace and whether he had ever met the Queen. James handled it all with grace and humor, fitting into the family dynamic as if he belonged there. Over the next 10 days, Emma showed James her world. They visited local landmarks that seemed mundane to her but fascinated him. The county fair with its fried foods and carnival rides, a high school baseball game, where James struggled to understand the rules but enjoyed the atmosphere, a 4th of July celebration at the town square, though it was early May, where they watched a small parade and ate too much barbecue. They drove to nearby cities, experiencing slices of American life. In Columbus, they visited museums and explored the university campus. In Cincinnati, they toured the historic neighborhoods and took a riverboat cruise. James was an enthusiastic traveler, curious about everything, asking locals about their lives and taking photographs constantly. But the best moments were the quiet ones. Sitting on Emma's front porch in the evening, talking about their dreams and uncertainties, walking through the woods behind her house, James amazed by wildlife that seemed ordinary to Emma. Late-night conversations in the kitchen over tea, when everyone else was asleep and they could talk about deeper things. James confessed that he was considering leaving the military when his service commitment ended in 18 months. He loved the discipline and camaraderie, but he wanted to explore other possibilities, maybe teaching or working with young people in some capacity. He wasn't sure yet, but the certainty he once had about his future was giving way to questions. Emma shared her own uncertainties. Her writing was going well, but she was still living with her parents at 24, unsure if she could make travel writing sustainable long-term. She loved her small town, but felt pulled toward bigger opportunities elsewhere. She wanted to travel more but worried about financial stability. James listened without trying to fix her problems, just offering understanding and support. On James's last full day, they drove to a lake an hour outside town. It was a place Emma had always loved, peaceful and relatively unknown to tourists. They rented a small boat and spent the afternoon floating on the calm water, talking intermittently but also comfortable with silence. As the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James said something that surprised Emma. He told her that meeting her had changed his perspective on life. Before the incident at the palace, he had been very focused on following rules, doing things the right way, maintaining order. Helping her had been the first time he had truly broken protocol, chosen human connection over prescribed behavior. The experience had opened something in him. He found himself questioning other rigid patterns in his life, asking whether he was living according to his own values or just following a path laid out by expectation. Emma's vulnerability in that moment and her grace in handling the aftermath had shown him that imperfection wasn't something to fear or hide. It was part of being human. Emma listened with tears in her eyes. She told James that he had changed her too. Before falling at the palace, she had been so focused on perfection, on capturing the perfect photos and writing the perfect blog posts. His kindness had shown her that authenticity mattered more than perfection, that human connection was worth more than flawless execution. They sat in that boat as the sky darkened, two people who had met through embarrassment and now found themselves profoundly connected. Neither wanted to say goodbye tomorrow. Neither knew when they would see each other again. But both knew that what they had found was rare and worth protecting. That evening, Emma's family threw an informal goodbye dinner. Neighbors were invited and the house filled with the kind of warm chaos that comes from good people gathering. James was passed around like a celebrity, everyone wanting to hear stories about the palace in London. He handled it all with patience, telling stories that made people laugh and asking questions that made them feel valued. Emma watched from the kitchen doorway as James chatted with her grandmother, who was showing him photos from her own trip to England 40 years earlier. He listened with genuine interest, asking about the places she had visited, making her feel like her memories mattered. That was James's gift, Emma realized. He made people feel seen and valued, not just in grand gestures but in small, consistent ways. Later, after the guests had left and her family had gone to bed, Emma and James sat on the back porch under a sky full of stars. The air was warm and filled with the sound of crickets. They didn't talk much, both feeling the weight of tomorrow's goodbye. Finally, James broke the silence. He told Emma he didn't want to lose what they had built. The distance was significant, and their lives were in different countries with different trajectories. But he valued her friendship more than he had valued any relationship in a long time. Whatever it took to maintain their connection, he was willing to try. Emma agreed wholeheartedly. She suggested they set regular video call times, not just random messages but dedicated moments to truly talk. James proposed visiting again in 6 months if finances allowed, and Emma immediately started planning a trip to London for later in the year. They made promises to each other, knowing that maintaining long-distance friendship required intention and effort. The next morning came too quickly. Emma drove James to the airport, both of them quieter than usual. At the departure gate, they hugged for a long time. James thanked her family through her, saying this visit had given him a new perspective on American life and on what he wanted from his own future. Emma told him he would always have a home in Ohio, whenever he needed it. Watching him walk through security, Emma felt an ache in her chest. She had gained so much from their unlikely friendship, and saying goodbye felt like losing something precious. But she also felt grateful. How many people got to experience this kind of connection? How many strangers became true friends driving home? Emma thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A broken barrier, a public fall, a moment of humiliation that could have ended so differently. If James hadn't chosen kindness that day, none of this would exist. Their friendship, built on vulnerability and grace, had become one of the most important relationships in her life. She pulled over at a rest stop and opened her laptop. Words flowed onto the screen, a new blog post forming. She wrote about unexpected friendships, about how the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, about choosing connection over convenience. Her followers had been asking for an update about James's visit, but she wanted to give them something deeper than just a travelogue. The post went live that evening and resonated even more deeply than her original story. People commented about their own unlikely friendships, about connections that defied logic or distance. The comment section became a beautiful collection of human stories. 2 years passed, filled with changes and growth for both Emma and James. Emma had established herself in Columbus, working as a freelance travel and lifestyle writer for several major publications. Her blog had grown to over 200,000 followers, but more importantly, she had found her authentic voice. She wrote about vulnerability, human connection, and finding beauty in imperfect moments. Her work resonated because it came from real experience. James had completed his transition from military service and was now in his 2nd year of university, studying to become a teacher. He specialized in working with troubled youth, bringing the discipline of his military background together with the compassion he had discovered. His professors consistently praised his unique perspective and his ability to connect with difficult students. They had visited each other 4 more times over those 2 years. James came to Ohio once, and Emma made 3 trips to England. Each visit deepened their friendship, proving that distance was an obstacle they could overcome with intention and commitment. Their Sunday video calls remained sacred, a constant in both their changing lives. During one of Emma's visits to London, James introduced her to his university friends at a pub near campus. They were a diverse group of future teachers, social workers, and counselors, all passionate about making a difference. Emma fit in naturally, her openness and storytelling ability winning them over quickly. One friend, Marcus, joked that James talked about Emma so often, they felt like they already knew her. That comment made Emma realize something she had been avoiding acknowledging. Her feelings for James had evolved beyond friendship at some point, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly when. Maybe it was during their late-night conversations when he shared his deepest fears. Maybe it was watching him interact so kindly with everyone he met. Or maybe it had been there from the beginning. From that moment, he extended his hand to help her up, but Emma was afraid to say anything. Their friendship was precious, spanning continents and built on mutual support. What if romantic feelings were one-sided? What if acknowledging them ruined everything they had built? The risk seemed too great, so she kept her feelings hidden, treasuring what they had rather than gambling for something more. James seemed to be in a similar position, though Emma didn't realize it. He found himself thinking about her constantly, comparing other women he met to her, finding them lacking. His university friends teased him about being in love with his American friend, but he always laughed it off. He told himself that Emma probably saw him only as a friend, that the distance made anything more impractical anyway. The turning point came in December, during Emma's 4th visit to London. James had invited her to spend Christmas with his family. Since her own family was understanding about her traveling for the holiday, she arrived a week before Christmas, excited to experience a traditional British holiday season. The city was magical, covered in lights and decorations. James took her to Winter Wonderland in Hyde Park, ice skating and drinking hot chocolate. They visited Christmas markets, wandered through Harrods' elaborate displays, and watched carolers in Trafalgar Square. Everything felt romantic, though neither acknowledged it out loud. On Christmas Eve at James's family home in a suburb outside London, something shifted. After dinner, while his parents and siblings were occupied with their own conversations, James asked Emma to step outside with him. They stood in the small back garden under a clear, cold sky, their breath visible in the winter air. James was nervous, unusually quiet. Finally, he said he needed to tell her something, and he needed her to just listen until he finished. Emma nodded, her heart beginning to race. James took a deep breath and began to speak. He told her that meeting her had been the most significant thing that had ever happened to him. Not just because of the viral moment or the friendship they had built, but because she had fundamentally changed how he saw the world and himself. She had shown him that vulnerability was strength, that imperfection was beautiful, that choosing compassion mattered more than following rules blindly. But more than that, he had fallen in love with her. He didn't know exactly when it happened, but it was undeniable now. He loved her laugh, her curiosity, her ability to find beauty in ordinary moments. He loved how she made everyone around her feel valued. He loved talking to her, being near her, knowing she existed in the world. He couldn't keep pretending his feelings were purely platonic anymore. James acknowledged the complications. The distance was significant and their lives were in different countries. He didn't have easy answers for how a relationship would work practically. He just knew he couldn't spend another visit pretending he didn't feel what he felt. If she didn't feel the same way, he would understand and work to preserve their friendship. But he had to be honest with her and with himself. Emma stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. When James finished speaking and looked at her with such vulnerability and hope, she couldn't hold back anymore. She told him she felt exactly the same way. She had been in love with him for months, maybe longer, but had been too afraid to risk their friendship by saying anything. They stood there in the cold garden, both crying and laughing with relief. James reached out and gently wiped tears from Emma's cheeks, his touch tender. Then finally, after 2 years of friendship and unacknowledged feelings, they kissed. It was soft and sweet, filled with emotion and promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. They talked for hours that night, long after returning inside to the warmth of the house. They discussed the practical challenges honestly. Emma's life was in Ohio and increasingly in Columbus. James had 2 more years of university in London, then would need to establish his career. Long-distance relationships were difficult even without international borders involved, but they both felt that what they had was worth fighting for. They had already proven they could maintain connection across distance as friends. Why couldn't they do the same as partners? They would visit when possible, video call regularly, and support each other's dreams. It wouldn't be easy, but the best things rarely were. Emma stayed through New Year's, and those days felt like living in a beautiful dream. They explored London as a couple now, holding hands and stealing kisses. They talked about futures that might include each other, cautiously optimistic despite the obstacles. James's family was thrilled, having apparently seen the romantic potential long before either Emma or James acknowledged it. When Emma returned to Ohio, the separation was harder than any previous goodbye. But it felt different now too, filled with promise rather than just loss. They were committed to making this work, whatever it took. Their first video call after her return lasted 6 hours, neither wanting to hang up. The following months tested their commitment. Time zones were challenging to coordinate. Jealousy crept in when either mentioned new friends of the opposite sex. There were misunderstandings that came from communicating primarily through screens and text. They had their first real fight in March, A stupid argument about something trivial that escalated because they couldn't read each other's body language properly, but they worked through it. They learned to communicate more clearly, to address issues immediately rather than letting them fester, to give each other grace during difficult moments. They scheduled regular visits, making sure they had in-person time to look forward to. They supported each other's dreams, Emma encouraging James's teaching aspirations, James celebrating Emma's writing successes. In April, Emma received an unexpected opportunity. A major travel magazine wanted to hire her as a contributing editor, but it would require relocating to New York. The salary was substantial, the opportunity incredible. It was everything she had been working toward. But New York was even further from London than Ohio, and the demanding schedule might make visits more difficult. She agonized over the decision for weeks. James insisted she couldn't pass up such an opportunity for him, but Emma worried that accepting would doom their relationship. Finally, she realized she needed to visit James and discuss it in person. She booked an impromptu flight to London, surprising him by showing up at his university library where he was studying. They walked through campus, discussing her dilemma honestly. James made his position clear. He loved her, and he wanted to be with her, but not at the cost of her dreams. She needed to take this job. They would figure out the relationship part. Maybe he could look into teaching opportunities in New York after graduation. Maybe they would make long-distance work for a few more years. Maybe the situation would resolve itself in ways they couldn't predict now. Emma realized he was right. They had already proven their relationship could survive distance and challenges. If it was meant to be, they would find a way. She accepted the position, moving to New York in June. The pace was intense, the work demanding, but it was exactly what she needed to take her career to the next level. James finished his degree the following spring, graduating with honors. Emma flew to London for his ceremony, sitting with his family and cheering as he walked across the stage. That evening, at his graduation celebration, James made an announcement that surprised everyone except Emma. He had been offered a teaching position at an international school in New York, starting in August.